You remember it clearly. Nelson Mandela dying in a South African prison sometime in the 1980s. You remember hearing about it. Maybe a headline, maybe a grainy broadcast, maybe a widow's face, a moment of silence at school, a teacher explaining what it meant. None of that happened. Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990. He became president of South Africa in 1994. He lived for almost 2 more decades after that, and he died in 2013, surrounded by family, mourned around the world in real time, on live television, with millions of people watching who had never once believed he'd died before. So why do so many people remember a funeral that never happened? In 2009, a woman named Fiona Broom stood in front of a room at a convention and described exactly this memory. Mandela, dead in prison, a funeral, news coverage she could describe in detail, and when she said it out loud, she expected people to correct her. They didn't. Person after person in that room said the same thing. They remembered it too, not vaguely, specifically, the same headlines, the same emotional weight. Broom gave the phenomenon a name that day, and the name stuck: the Mandela Effect, a shared false memory held with total confidence by people who had never spoken to each other before. At first, it sounds like a fluke. One strange coincidence, blown out of proportion by a room full of overactive imaginations. Then you hear the second example, and the third, and somewhere around the 10th, the coincidence starts to feel like something else entirely. Ask anyone to spell the name of the children's book series about a family of cartoon bears. Most people, without hesitation, will spell it Binstin. They'll spell it that way in interviews. They'll spell it that way in old blog posts, years before anyone had ever heard the term Mandela Effect. They will argue genuinely and passionately that they remember the box art from their childhood bedroom. The actual spelling has always been Berenstain, not Berenstein. Every book, every episode, every piece of merchandise, going back to 1962. Not a typo, not a rebrand. It has simply never been spelled the way an enormous number of people insist they remember it. Ask someone to picture the mascot from a certain board game about buying property. Top hat, cane, moustache, and in the memory of thousands of people, a monocle glinting over one eye. He has never worn a monocle, not in a single official piece of art, in over 80 years of the game's existence. Ask someone how a certain iconic chocolate wafer bar is spelled on the wrapper. A huge number of people will confidently include a hyphen that has never once appeared on the actual packaging. Individually, these all sound like small, forgettable mistakes, the kind of thing you'd expect from imperfect memory and a busy world. But that's not what makes this strange. What makes it strange is the consistency. Different countries, different decades, different people who have never spoken to one another, independently arriving at the exact same wrong detail, with the exact same unshakable confidence. That consistency is what pulled the internet in, because if a memory is just wrong, you'd expect it to be wrong in 100 different, random ways, a blurry recollection, a vague guess. Instead, entire communities of strangers converge on one specific, identical error, as if they were all remembering the same alternate version of events. And once you notice that pattern, you start looking for a bigger explanation, because small mistakes shouldn't feel this synchronized. This is the point where the theories get strange. Some point to CERN, the physics laboratory home to the Large Hadron Collider, and its high-energy particle experiments. The theory suggests that these experiments are creating small ruptures between parallel timelines, and that some of us are experiencing bleed-through from a version of reality slightly different from our own. In that version, maybe the bears really were spelled Berenstein. Maybe Mandela really did die in the 1980s. It's a compelling idea. It's also, according to actual physicists, not remotely how particle physics works. There is no experimental evidence connecting collider research to memory, timelines, or anything resembling the plot of a science fiction film. Which leaves a harder question. If it isn't parallel universes, what is causing thousands of unconnected people to misremember the exact same detail, in the exact same way? The answer isn't new, it's almost a century old. In 1932, a psychologist named Frederick Bartlett published research built around a deceptively simple experiment. He had people read an unfamiliar folk story, then asked them to recall it again and again over weeks and months. Every single time the story changed, details were dropped, gaps were filled in, and the changes weren't random. People reshaped the story to fit patterns and expectations that already existed in their own minds. Bartlett's conclusion reframed how an entire field understood memory. Remembering isn't like pressing play on a recording. It's closer to reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain isn't retrieving a perfect file. It's rebuilding the memory from fragments, filling gaps with whatever fits best, and it does this so smoothly that the final result feels exactly as real as if it had actually happened that way. Now add a second discovery, and the picture gets even stranger. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus ran a study that would end up reshaping courtrooms and criminal investigations. She and her colleagues convinced a percentage of study participants that they had a specific childhood memory of getting lost in a shopping mall. It never happened. It was entirely fabricated by the researchers. And yet a meaningful number of participants didn't just accept the suggestion. They elaborated on it. They added sensory details. They described the fear of that day with total conviction. Their brains hadn't just accepted a false idea. They had manufactured a memory to match it, complete with the emotional texture of something real. Put those two findings together, and a new explanation for the Mandela Effect starts to take shape. Cartoon bears with an unusual last name, matched against the far more common name pattern most people already know. A cane-carrying mascot who looks, in the popular imagination, exactly like the kind of wealthy cartoon figure who should be wearing a monocle. A hyphen that simply feels grammatically correct, so brains insert it automatically, every time, without anyone consciously deciding to. These aren't isolated glitches in 100 separate minds. They're the predictable result of shared cultural patterns acting on the same reconstructive memory process, in millions of brains that all grew up steeped in the same visual cliches and the same associations. Which is either the most comforting explanation available, or the most unsettling one, depending on how you look at it. Comforting because it means there's no rupture in the fabric of reality, no alternate timeline bleeding through, just a well-documented, thoroughly studied feature of how human memory actually works. Unsettling because that feature isn't rare, and it isn't limited to cartoon bears and board game mascots. If your memory can quietly, confidently rewrite a detail as basic as a spelling on a book cover, and hand you back a version you'd swear on anything is accurate, then the question stops being about Mandela, or bears, or monocles. It becomes a question about everything else you're certain you remember correctly. Which brings us back to where this started. A room full of strangers, each one positive they remembered a funeral that never happened. Not lying, not confused in any way they could detect. Simply certain, the way you're certain about your own name, about a memory their own minds had quietly reconstructed and handed back as fact. You believed it too for a second when this started. Some part of you may still be picturing that headline that never existed. And if your memory can do that once, without you ever noticing the moment it happened, the real question isn't whether some of your memories have already been rewritten. It's how you'd ever be able to tell.